Morning all. The Gibraltar Masters tournament is on currently, and if you're in the King's Crusher Cafe or on Chessboard, I've put links to it. If there is actually live games being shown on a viewer. The morning games are the under 2250 tournament, but in the afternoon the Masters tournament starts. So in round 2 we had a big shock. ViKtor Korchnoi, who's about 79 years old now, I believe, he beat one of the young Super GMs, Caruana, Fabiano, Caruana, 27-2-1. So ViKtor's rating's 2544 at the moment, and he was playing black. We'll take his perspective. So E4, E5. Now, in the games that I'm really keen to look at, actually, the first 3 games from Gibraltar that I would ideally like to video annotate, you'll notice a very assertive pawn structure and pawn movements from the winners of these games. Very aggressive use of pawn structure, not too concerned about creating theoretical weaknesses. And this game is no different. You'll see in this game very aggressive use of the F pawn later from ViKtor. So it starts off seemingly a tame, variation of the Ruy Lopez standard beaten territory. So knight F6, but now we see a little potentially passive move D3, okay, avoiding things like the Marshall game and other stuff like that. So D6 and now C3. So White simply wants to get this centre slowly with D4. So bishop E7, both sides castle, and now rook E1. So the young Caruana is content with a quiet, solid build-up. Maybe slowly maneuver the knight somewhere to, maybe E3 or G3 later. That F5 square is sometimes key. Also, there's this D4 to prepare. For Black's point of view, though, something very interesting is going on now after knight D7. ViKtor is rerouting this knight to B6, and also he's making way for his F pawn to aggressively be pushed very soon. So bishop E3, knight B6. Okay, and he doesn't mind the double pawns, of course. Picking up the dark square bishop will be good compensation. You can imagine dark square targets after losing this bishop. So for the moment, bishop b3. Okay, now unpinning the pawn with king h8 makes way, for a simple but effective, kingside attack. So knight bd2 and f5 comes straight away now. Not worrying about anything in particular. Okay, now I guess Fabiano's strategy here, he's seeing this as a weakening move potentially, and now taking the opportunity to, in effect, play a positional sacrifice now. Bishop takes b6. Okay, he's doubling the pawns, he's getting a bit more control over the d5 square and the light squares generally. But this comes at a cost now, and you'll see now this very assertive use and aggressive use of pawns, which I previously mentioned. And we'll see that in the other 2 games that I want to have a look at. The Ivanchuk and Nigel Short wins as well from this round. But here, this demonstration of aggression with the dark square bishop carrying the attack forward as well. G5. I don't know how many of you guys have considered G5. It looks like a kind of blitz game move, but it seems perfectly logical. Okay, White might have an iron grip on the light squares and might choose EF at some point, maybe trying to get E4 as well. For the moment, though, White plays H3, and again, ViKtor very aggressive with his pawns. He plays G4. So after HG, FG. Okay, White's not going to be able to use the E4 square for a piece anytime soon, it seems. After knight H2, G pawn's attacked, but tactically it's now defended. Forget rook G8, so that's ruled out anyway. Just play simple bishop G5. So if knight G4, there's bishop takes D2, and then bishop takes G4. So the pawn is indirectly defended by this counter attack on D2. So we see knight C4 now. Okay, the knight's kicked again, B5. And now we see knight E3, and maybe this is the point of White's play, to try and get a stranglehold on the light squares. Now, ViKtor gives up his dark square bishop, and after rook takes E3, again counter attacks. So this G pawn push, creating theoretical weaknesses, but ViKtor always finding ways of counter attacking. So here now with queen F6. So if knight G4 then takes and then queen takes F2, would actually be winning the rook. So queen E1 protecting F2. So finally White looks a bit passive. This knight looks a bit passive. This f file looks a bit juicy. So we see the move knight e7. So this knight's going to be a bit more aggressive as well. It's all working like clockwork for black at the moment. f3, and now we see knight takes, e takes, and rook g8. Looks so simple. Just use the g file against white's king. Simple chess. Simple attacking chess. So queen g3, and now we see g takes. So what is the young Fabiano after here? Is he after endgame weaknesses? He's after something, but it looks very passive. So bishop f5. Now bishop f5 does put d3 under attack, and if there's going to be a queen g6 later, it's going to combine two attacks on d3 and g2. We're going to see that very soon, actually. First, though, again, ViKtor's forced to defend a piece, and it looks like a horrible pin as well at the moment, but he's going to shift his queen out of that f file very soon. In fact, now queen h6. So everything's been held together tactically. The knight's pinned anyway. Okay, so rook f2, rook ag8. All of black's pieces are working hard against the white king. There's also some pressure on d3. So we see rook e1, and now this double attack. So maybe this was a blunder, rook e1, actually. You know, because it left out the weakness of the last move here, as well as d3 being less protected by this battery of rook and queen. You know, g2 is now under fire simultaneously by this queen g6. So maybe a painful move to meet now and to see. Simple, but seems to be just winning a pawn. So rook e3, bishop takes d3, pawn up, king g1, passive knight as well. Lovely triple battery on the g pawn as well, tying down these two guys. So e4, queen h3, keeping an eye on g2 for dear life, but losing another pawn now, because this e4 had discovered an attack on the pawn. So rook takes d5, 2 pawns up. It's looking a bit of an embarrassing series of events here. I don't know if this was time pressure or something, but Caruana's fallen to bits. Queen d7, again the triple rook battery, tying white down, forcing a weakness. g4 actually. Okay, g4. So can he just about survive rook takes g4 here? Apparently he can. ViKtor didn't choose rook g4. Okay, first there'll be knight g4 and queen g4, so that's nothing at the moment. And h5, there's rook h3. You don't want to pawn pin to your own king. There's safer ways of proceeding the attack here. So ViKtor chooses queen h6. Okay, there's an immediate unveiling threat of rook takes g4 though, and then queen takes e3 after, potentially. So again, white needs to be careful or counter-attack something in response to that. Rook f7. So tying the queen down to h7 looks a bit scary. So rook 5 to g7, defending that second rank. Rook g7, queen d8 check. Can ViKtor get out of this this pressure? So queen b6. White goes pawn hunting on the queen side. Queen looks a bit out of the way, bit of a distance from the king here. So queen f6. Alright, this is not defending b7, refusing to do that, but it's actually threatening to an entry, maybe queen f4. And then that would be dangerous for g3 if the rook ever moves. But also there's another idea, maybe an entry to f2 if there's a battery of rook f8. So there's a couple of entry points at least. Queen takes b7, and now the latter point, actually f2 is used. So rook f8, creating that battery for that very scary queen f2. Okay, we see queen a7, and now there's an attention shift. You know, these pawns, the inertia of these pawns in the center could be accelerated if there wasn't a pawn here. You can imagine d5, d4. So this lovely move b4, temporary pawn sack, because then, you know, if it takes d5, d4, then maybe e3, that would shut down the diagonal as well. So it's not taken, of course. Rook h3, counter-attacking on h7. Queen g7, attacking the queen, protecting h7. Queen e3. ViKtor's young opponent is not wanting a queen exchange, but c3 is also under fire here now. So ViKtor takes on c3, and again, because, you know, strategically d5, d4 is going to be more effective now without the c3 pawn. So Rook H5, and now we see D5. So this creates a state of panic, I think, an overload in the white position. It's not a simple G-file attack that a lot of us maybe would have been interested in, but creating another sort of area where white has to be really concerned about these centre pawns just crashing down through the centre with D4, E3. But this D5 pawn is not taken here. Probably it gets tactically refuted in some way. I guess Queen A1 is always a dangerous check. So at the moment G5 was played, which actually creates a new tactical threat, G6, Rook H7 potentially. So he's keeping a lock on the bishop at the moment with the queen, and anyway blocking that pawn, so the bishop can't defend H7 at the moment. Check, King G2, and now a seemingly maybe pedantic check, awkward looking, bishop F1, but actually very, very effective, because where is the white king going here? Because there's a powerful recentralizing move now emerging with the queen. If King G1, then bishop H3 check is very, very nasty. But King G3, now there's Queen E5. And this is embarrassing. Okay. Now, in this position, actually the young Fabiano resigns, making history that ViKtor's beaten, this 27-20. But why does he resign? Let's have a quick look at King G4, just to make absolutely sure. Okay. I think let's stick on a Kh8 to find the most clinical continuation here. Right. In this position, actually, instead of any check, like bishop e2, there's no brilliant check needed. Just to move d4 actually dislodges the queen, I think. So you can imagine, say queen, d2 for example, simple example, then e3, with queen f4 mating next. So that can't happen. And say queen g3, then bishop e2 check, actually skewering the king and rook rather embarrassingly. So here just the simple taking off queens and taking the rook. Okay, anything else here? After queen e5 and d4, looks quite crushing actually, really. Pretty desperate position. So queen g3 would be one of the best moves, and losing horribly to bishop e2 check. So simple move d4 here. These centre pawns, the dynamism, knocking out that c3 pawn earlier, was actually key to making sure this king is actually extremely vulnerable. So after this queen e5, the young Caruana resigned. Let's have a look at this game again then, in overview and summary. I think it was a neatly played game, very assertive pawn moves, seemingly, a recklessness about it, I'd say. And I'm going to say that because when we look at the EventDate and short games, especially the EventDate game, we're going to see a similar kind of controlled recklessness about using the pawns very, very aggressively. Okay, so and it's against this passive setup I think this has afforded this kind of idea of just using the f pawn and g pawns. So first, the f pawn is made free. Doesn't matter about the double pawns over there. He's picked up the dark squared bishop. Potentially it's a passive dark squared bishop, so the pawn moves also help liberate that bishop later on the dark squares. But it's given up at the right moment. Here there's a lot of pressure being exerted by white on the light squares, so giving it up here and then counter attack on f2 is key. So white was actually put on the defensive here. And I had a similar game actually when I once played in Gibraltar 2-3 years ago. I was put on the defensive and the opponent was able to build up pressure. But I created some chances but still lost. It was only against an FM, and I didn't do well in that tournament. But it was enjoyable to play there at Gibraltar. I played Nakamura at 5-minute chess in the Caleta bar. The tournament is played hosted by the Caleta Hotel, and many of the players stay there at the hotel. It's very, very interesting, very relaxed atmosphere. And if you want to play there's an under 1800 section, there's an under 2250 section in the mornings. If you want to get loads of FIDE rated games in, you could play in both the morning event, which is on live relay as well on the internet, as well as the afternoon event, which is the Masters tournament, this tournament. So this was in round 2. So yeah, ViKtor's put his young opponent already. You can see he's put it on the defensive, and I don't know, Queen G6. There's nothing, why couldn't White? Let's have a question here. Why couldn't White defend this pawn? Let's add the Qb6 here, just to check this position before we move on. It's bad for White in theory. In fact, Rivka really likes White's position. If D4, then just E4. So we have this queen distraction idea again from G2. So if Queen E3, then Rook takes G2. So this battery really is having an effect in conjunction with some central pawn moves. So D4 couldn't have been played. So if Knight F1's given the best move, just losing the D pawn, but under this circumstance with Knight E3. But again, Bishop E4, and it's better for Black. So already in this position, theoretically, Caruana's getting done over, it seems, with this triple battery on G2 and battery on D3 simultaneously with Queen G6. Personally, I like the move Queen G6. We see that in some key historic games, like the Fischer-Spassky match. Fischer had played Queen G6 in 1 or 2 games with decisive effect against Spassky. But Queen G6, okay. So Rook E3. So this was the first pawn loss event of the game, and after this, we see this potential, this pawn mass being dangerous, and White's really tied down, so he's losing that D5 pawn as well. It doesn't matter to ViKtor he's losing B7, the pawns are doubled really. If he can just increase the inertia of his central pawns like he did in the game, it means that his attack can be very, very effective later. And he just needs to infiltrate with his queen really. So Queen takes B7, Rook F8, threatening infiltration on F2. But he doesn't. The clever thing is not using it here. Doesn't quite do anything here. The Queen protecting the Rook from a distance seems like a very technical move to me to make, and very scary move, allowing the Queen's entry to F2. But it's not taken. ViKtor just calmly plays B4. He wants to get these pawns going, so that's key at the moment for ViKtor, and he knows he can be counter-attacked on H7 as well, so the Queen's actually perhaps more flexible than F6 at the moment, so he can play the move Queen G7, safeguarding H7. After Queen E3, then he carries on the work on the central pawn movements by knocking out the C3 pawn, so making way for D5 and D4s. So now check, check, and after Queen E5, check, his young opponent resigned because D4's coming. If King G4, then there's D4. And then if Queen D2, then there's E3. So this is real trouble. If Queen G3, as we saw, Bishop E2. So then take the Queen and take the Rook. A crushing game from ViKtor the Terrible. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.